At this moment, I am very sweaty and have a severe headache. Now's probably a very good time to review Fire Emblem Fates. Fire Emblem Fates is the 14th game in the series, and it's also the final game in the series that isn't a remake, which means this is where my little review series ends until I play Three Houses and complain about that too. If ever there was a game I was unhyped to talk about, it's this. I'm anticipating that I will alienate the very, very slim number of people still watching this, no matter what I say, because Fates has become one of the most controversial and divisive games of all time, and for that to happen in Fire Emblem of all things, it doesn't feel good. Fates begins by doing something that was speculated to happen by crazy people, and then it actually happened. The game was divided into 3 versions. They are Conquest, Birthright, and Revelations. See, the idea behind Fates' story is that your character, who is an avatar unit, was born into the Hoshido royal family, but was captured and raised by the Nor royal family. Nor, am I saying this correctly? Sort of like in Fire Emblem Gaiden, where Alm was born in Rigel but raised in Sofia, or Genealogy with Altina being born in Leinster but raised in Thracia. In the 6th chapter, the two families fight each other, and the player has to choose whether to side with Nor, Hoshido, or neither, and therein lies the major version differences. The weapons, characters, and chapters change depending on the chosen version. But this version split creates many problems. Splitting the game into multiple versions has been criticized as a way for Nintendo to get more money out of consumers, as whatever game you buy first costs $40, and when you get to the point where the player has to choose who to side with, there's a button for purchasing the other 2 versions for $20 apiece. On release, there was a special edition which included all 3 versions and additional content for $80. What's more, Conquest and Birthright, from a story perspective, feel very incomplete, with threads hanging and canonical deaths with subtle clues to please buy Revelations to get the absolute 100% best ending. Not to mention that from the dev team perspective, they have to rush out 3 campaigns in 1 development cycle, which is not a good sign. However, the version split on its own isn't that offensive, because Pokemon does it, Battle Network did it a lot, and the Zelda Oracle games pretty much made 2 games out of the same engine, which is probably the most apt comparison. The problem is that all of these games reach the same story conclusion no matter what version you played. They didn't want you to purchase both games to get the full experience, although the Zelda games I mentioned rewarded you for doing so. Pokemon and Battle Network wanted to encourage you to link up with another player who had the other version to collect everything, not buy the same game twice. This is a misconception a lot of people still make about Pokemon. If Fates had made the special edition the only version, even at $80 I wouldn't mind, but because it's divided into 3 games, technically that lets them inflate the sales numbers because completionists will want all 3 versions. Also, making the version with the best ending the version that you have to already own one of the other 2 to get to, that's cheap, really. So, having said all of this, I should point out that even though I'd like to review all 3 games, I haven't played either Birthright or Revelations, just Conquest. I heard beforehand that, of the 3, Birthright follows the Awakening school of level design, and Conquest is much closer to the older Fire Emblem games, so it was clear to me which to pick. Although Revelations just sounds terrible from what others have told me. While only Conquest will get any gameplay or engine-related discussion from me, I can at least talk about the story of the other 2, given that there are transcriptions online and all. Although, before talking about the story, I guess there is one thing that should be brought up. The localization! See, Fates is an oddity in that the fan communities took interest in translating Fates long before it actually came out, because they were eager to see what the game was like. Because of this, we were able to directly compare a direct translation of the dialogue with the official one that eventually happened, but there were a few, complications. I guess I should start from the beginning. So Fates was getting translated by fans shortly after its release. One of the support conversations actually caught public interest. In the supports between a male main character and the character Soleil, Soleil talks about an issue she has where cute girls make her pass out. This is a problem on the battlefield, so the main character decides to feed her a magic potion that makes her think girls are dudes and vice versa, without her knowing it. Then she falls in love with the main character. And if you're thinking this is bizarre and stupid, well, this is Fate, so that's the tip of the iceberg as far as supports go, but more on that later. People were weirded out by how the conversations go, but things turned ugly very quickly when the script of the conversations was posted on some Tumblr account, misinterpreted to make it look like the main character was performing some kind of gay conversion therapy on a lesbian girl, which wasn't what was actually happening, but it looked suspect enough to get the Tumblr post circulated on social media, and games journalists, being the paragons they are, spread the misinformation because controversy brings in the clicks like crazy. The public pressure actually convinced the localization team to rewrite the supports to be less vulnerable to misinterpretation. Now it's a blindfold instead of a potion, which I do think is an improvement, but games journalists were still patting themselves on the back for the glorious victory regardless. But that wasn't the only problem with the localization, that was just the one with the most drama attached. There are numerous other instances of the localization writers editing out difficult topics, flanderizing character traits, writing like a bunch of 5-year-olds for 5-year-olds. The most egregious examples were cutting the minigame where you touch a character's face to boost their support bonds, cutting an entire support conversation just to reference some joke in the fandom about men of few words. They also had Soleil friendzone everyone in order to preserve this idea that she might not be straight. They also made everyone friendzone Kana because he looks prepubescent, and that would look awkward. And oh my god, Hisame made me never want pickles on my burger ever again. Oh, and although Awakening had Japanese voice acting included in the NA release, Fates doesn't. Although Awakening also still has this unfixed bug where it gives you English voices outside of cutscenes anyways, so just turn the voices off. They're awful. We've got trouble. This localization is honestly a mess, and it stirred up an attempt to boycott the localization and have everyone just import the original. People also started paying closer attention to other localizations, such as the one for Bravely Default. What's really sick is that, when this was happening, I got to watch a huge chunk of the Fire Emblem fanbase turn very ugly as they defended the localization and made numerous attempts to deflect any criticism of it. I'm fully aware that localization changes happen basically all the time, but for the previous Fire Emblem games, at least they were all still enjoyable. Since writing this review, I've seen many errors pointed out in Blazing Sword's English script. That's bad, but it didn't detract from anyone enjoying Blazing Sword, now did it? When I play Fates and actually bother with the cutscenes, I want to pull my hair out. Even Awakening didn't read like a children's storybook. I apologize to children's storybook authors for the insulting comparison. If you are a fan of Fire Emblem, then even if you enjoy Fates or thought the story was bad anyways, wouldn't you want to see localizers do their jobs better than this? And I get it, the story in Fates is bad, and I'm about to get into why, but the localization only hurts it even more. Awakening's story was lame, but at least you could read it. Anyways, our main character is Korin, known as Kamui in Japan, making him the second avatar whose default name is that of a Gaiden character. As stated, he must choose between his birth family and the family he grew up with. Oh, and he's also a dragonborn with Monokete powers when the writers remember he has them, of course. And the ability to alter the terrain itself, whenever the level designers allow for it, of course. It's no more complicated than opening a door. Korin is perhaps one of the biggest Mary Sues in the franchise, big enough in fact to make Markyjoe look good. He has superpowers, the narrative states he wins battles without killing people. What a darling little angel he is. Everyone on his side loves him, his implied siblings are totally willing to hook up with him, you get the picture. One thing that strikes me as being, well, interesting is that Hoshido is a very Japanese-style kingdom, considering the weapons, the architecture, etc., and that Nor is very European with traditional Fire Emblem weapons and character designs. While Hoshido is portrayed as a total good guy paradise, Nor is portrayed as a country of jerk conquerors, but without the nuance of Rigel and Sophia from Gaiden. Hoshido is also the route that plays like Awakening, and Nor is the route that plays like older Fire Emblem games. Are you blown away or what? At least that's according to fans. Remember, I can't speak for Hoshido or Revelations, but I do know Nor doesn't let you infinitely grind levels, so there's that. As stated, the version split and the tendency to nudge the player into buying the other versions does not bode well for this story. In the Hoshido route, Korin and pals set out to defeat Nor. In the Nor route, Corrin initially wants to make peace between the kingdoms before it's conveniently revealed that Nor's king is an evil monster, and because they conveniently can't reveal this to anyone, they decide to just conquer Hoshido anyways, because this will get the king to sit on the Hoshido throne, which will conveniently expose him. Everything else in these routes is typically filler. Revelation starts with Corrin escaping the choice entirely and entering Vala, the Invisible Kingdom, which has been orchestrating the war between the other two and is ruled by a jerk dragon named Anankos. Corrin enters Vala briefly in the conquest route, but they're conveniently kept in the dark for no other reason than to please buy Revelations. Corrin convinces both armies to stop fighting each other and fight Anankos instead. And I'm probably repeating myself like crazy, but it's so obviously trying to get you to buy the other versions. And you know something? I recently found out that a big-name manga author penned the plot to this one. Normally I'd say that explains a lot, but I get the feeling he wrote a draft and then the execs took it and started thinking of ways to work in game mechanics they wanted, like My Castle, a base-building mechanic that is actually kind of nice until you realize it breaks the narrative, and the second generation. This story doesn't have any time travel, so they had to come up with some way to get the kids to grow up faster. So they have the parents send their kids to an alternate dimension where time is faster and they grow up there. Wow. Talk about bad parenting. Especially when they could have just lived in My Castle. Speaking of supports, this game features the first ever homosexual options. All two of them. One per game for the main character only. Both characters involved are awful, and if you take the gay option anyways, you lose Corrin's child permanently for obvious reasons, which makes me wonder why this was even an option in the first place. Characters also tend to act inconsistently between versions of the game and their supports. A great example of this is the character Xander, and since I'm not too deep into Fate supports at this time, I will instead recommend a great pair of videos by the YouTuber Ghaststation, where he examines Xander and as he is characterized across the different versions and his supports. It's a great window into the issues with Fate's writing. Links to that will be in the description. This game also seems to want to leave Fire Emblem traditions behind too, well except for incest, which they gleefully kept in until the plot twist that the incest pairings aren't incest at all. Almost none of the characters this time around are recruited by talking with them, they all just join automatically. In fact, very few of the previous character archetypes, such as the Navarre or Oguma, are present in Fates. Weapons have infinite uses like in Gaiden, and I swear, if I have to mention Gaiden one more time, I'll lose my head. I'm not even sure why they decided to do that. Fire Emblem is supposed to be about resource management, so they've actually removed a huge part of that. Not to mention that all the money you get isn't worth nearly as much, since buying a big weapon means it comes with some downside still. People I talk to tell me that there was no point to weapon durability anyways, because you get so much gold that running out of weapons is no issue, and if you bring up durability being a downside to powerful stuff like the Brave Sword, they'll say that players often hoard such weapons to the point that they were never used anyways, which tells me that the player base has some kind of problem, not the games themselves. Except because Fates puts penalties on weapons to make up for their infinite uses, you'll probably only use iron or silver anyways. And if weapons have infinite uses, why don't the staves? The only Fire Emblem game where resource management is a big issue is Thracia 776, because it never gives you any gold for free. You have to steal most of your items, and did I just praise Thracia 776? What has Fate done to me? I think what was the most shocking addition, however, was a little something called Phoenix Mode. Fates has classic and casual modes as before, but they also introduced a new mode called Phoenix Mode. And what does this glorious creation do? Anytime someone dies in Phoenix Mode, they get back up again on the next turn. Wow! Now death is not but a slap on the wrist. Granted, you can't use it on hard or lunatic modes, but come on, who do they think their player base consists of? Small children? I mean, fine, it's an option and you don't have to use it, but it amazes me sometimes how little effort the developers demand of the player to win. Or is this exclusively for the reviewers who can't finish the game in time to review it on release day? One of the positive points of Fates, shocking, I know, is that they've nerfed pair-ups while at the same time removing its random elements. You're guaranteed dual strikes now, but never when paired up, and dual blocks happen at fixed intervals while paired up. Pair-up bonuses were nerfed as well. The whole thing is far less game-breaking, but still encourages strategic positioning, and considering how the maps are laid out, that's a good thing for certain. Forge was pretty much the same in Awakening as it was in Shadow Dragon, but Fates has nerfed it, and it's probably a good thing even if we lose a ton of customization. Now you just need to get materials to upgrade your weapons. Materials? What are those, you ask? Well, first let me introduce one of the big new features, My Castle. Before the path split, one of your maids who is secretly a dragon, okay, now the manga author thing makes sense, reveals that she has her own palace in another dimension that you can go to whenever you want between chapters. You can build stuff in the castle, like a farm or a weapon store, and mining the natural resources is how you get weapon materials and other stuff. Why, you can even feed your dragon maid like she's a pet. A massively powerful pet that defends the castle if another player decides to invade it, but a pet nonetheless. Oh, and in any route except Revelations, spoiler alert, she gets killed. But all of her functions still work, so I don't really know what the point of that was besides please buy Revelations. Oh, and the multiplayer functions are kinda nice too. This My Castle stuff is so cool, why doesn't Corrin just live in the castle forever? There's food and stuff, not to mention friends and a pet dragon. But one of the biggest jokes in the game is the capture mechanic. No, it has nothing to do with Thracia 776's capture, which would have been the most awesome thing ever. Only one character is allowed to capture in Fates. It's a skill for some reason. When you do, the enemy gets sent to My Castle and you can convince them to join you. This has the advantage of netting you some skills the regular enemies have. But what's the point? You're not going to use those soldiers, you can't name them, can't support them, you don't even take their items. At this point I'm inclined to believe that they're making a mockery out of all the older games, but I should at least stop myself before I make a tinfoil hat or something. There's just so much of this that doesn't fit in Fire Emblem. While I said that about Awakening as well, this game might as well be the anti-Fire Emblem. The story's a mess for the sake of having multiple versions. The game mechanics have gotten further away from tradition. Old mechanics resurface in name only. A second generation is shoehorned in again, and for North American players you have an extremely low quality and debatably insulting localization effort, resulting in more controversy that I guess did a good job of making Fire Emblem more mainstream in a twisted sort of way. The good points are that Pair Up is now a respectable mechanic and Conquest level design is, well, it's passable, but come on. I didn't want to see Fire Emblem become this. We are insanely lucky that Three Houses even exists, because after Fates and Shadows of Valentia, I was expecting Fire Emblem to sink back into obscurity and die like Advance Wars did, so let's hope Three Houses doesn't repeat any of these mistakes. I'm torn on whether to be hyped for Three Houses, but there's hope. Where there's life, there's hope.